Rent controls are coming to the UK, but they're not guaranteed, not a guaranteed win for tenants. We often hear about rent controls. I mean, on the face of it, some people controlling rent, and you look at some of the rents around the UK, you think, well, this is, they're ridiculous. When I think about what, a rent is more than a mortgage, so that to many people seems a bit weird. But when you look at the disproportionate rise in rents, there's an absolute issue there. You've now got people bidding for houses, and God knows what percentage of people's wages are now going towards rent. I mean, it's a ludicrous amount of money. Let's speak to Nye Jones, Head of Campaigns for Generation Rent. Nye, good afternoon to you.
Hi Ian, thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. Now, I kind of get the notion, I just don't know how you fairly implement a rent control. What do you think?
I mean, it's really good to hear that you kind of understand the need for actions on our rents, and you put it into context quite well, but I'll add a bit more context that if since 1988, if the cost of bananas has risen at the same speed as private rents, a bunch would now cost nearly £13 in the supermarket. And we do actually have statistics about how much renters are spending on their rent. Yeah. So nationally, it's an average of 36% of income. But in cities like London, Bristol and Edinburgh, it's well over 40%.
Yeah. Have you ever bought a banana in Waitrose, no?
I tend to go to Aldi or Lidl as I'm a private renter and all my money gets spent on rent.
Listen, no, it does. And I work with a lot of younger people and they tell the same story. But of course, it's had a mixed history, hasn't it? Rent controls. We've had them they've been around for thousands of years, literally thousands of years. We had them, I think, after the First World War in this country. Again, there seemed to be a necessity for it then. Could we realistically do it now? We're not North Korea. Why should we be stopping people charging whatever they want and people paying whatever they can?
Yeah, I think it's important to make clear what we're talking about in context of the UK. We aren't talking about a freeze on rents or reducing rents. In terms of what's being brought in Scotland, we're talking about a cap, similar to like the energy price cap, on how much landlords can raise the rent. And that's tagged to inflation plus 1%. So it still leaves room for landlords to raise the rent in line with rising costs. But what it prevents them from doing is issuing sudden, really high, unaffordable rent hikes that either leave renters spending huge swathes of their money on rent or force them to leave the home and become priced out of their communities.
It does differ, of course, from place to place. You mentioned the cost of rents. I think down in London, it's about £2,200 a month is the average rent. I mean, these are sky-high figures. There will be a lot of landlords that say, yeah, and my mortgage is £2,000 a month. So do one, Nye.
I mean, what I would say back to them is I would question the idea that landlords will be kind of forced out the market by limits on rent increases. As I said, it still gives scope for rents to be raised. Also, HMRC records show that just 42% of landlords declare mortgage interest on their tax return. So this means around 58% don't have any borrowing on the homes they own. And the latest English private landlord survey showed in the main, landlords raise the rent because they can charge more, because the rental market allows them, not because they have a financial need to. And if a landlord does decide to sell their home because, say, rent controls are brought in, that home isn't bulldozed to the ground. It could be bought by someone who actually wants to live in it, or it could be bought by another landlord. And landlords can also sell with tenants in situ to minimize disruptions to people's lives.
Do you just hate landlords, Nye?
No, we don't hate landlords, but we think that there is a power imbalance between tenants and landlords that's caused huge social problems. I've talked about people being priced out of communities. If you think about the average time a family spends in temporary accommodation now is more than 5 years. And that's because they simply can't find somewhere to rent that's affordable. And the mass loss of social homes has created this huge demand for private rents, and we need to better regulate private renting to make it fairer for renters.
Where has this worked brilliantly? Because I remember in the sort of 2020s, Berlin tried this and it fell through the flipping floor, didn't it? Because the amount of availability of property just diminished.
I mean, what Berlin tried was different. That was a rent freeze. So there was no scope for landlords to raise the rent. What we're talking about here is quite different. This is a limit on rent increases. So it will allow landlords to raise the rent with rising costs, with inflationary measures. But it will stop the really soaring rents that we've seen in recent years that have caused huge social problems. And I mean, what we're asking for isn't radical or utopian. We just want renters to be able to live in good quality homes that don't force them to make impossible choices like heating or eating each month. I mean, in 2026, I don't think that's too much to ask.
There are, of course, there's landlords and then there's landlords. And I'm not talking here about, some kind of Russian plutocrat who owns 5,000 homes around the UK. And I believe those examples are actually quite real. But the average person might have inherited a house or something like that. There are some of those landlords that, because of other rules and regulations which they sense are either too bureaucratic or just actually not even fair on the landlord, it is possible for the landlord to be dealt a blow sometimes. Some of those guys are selling up. Now, if too many of them sell up, you reduce the stock and then, of course, well, in theory, the rent goes up. So is it a case of being careful what you wish for here?
I mean, as I've said, if a landlord does decide to sell a home, that home doesn't disappear. Often it will be bought by a first-time buyer or another landlord who's willing to rent it out. So, I mean, I've seen this argument framed often by landlord groups that controls on our rents are bad for renters, and I would reject that. I think what rent caps would give us would be a sense of stability and security, knowing that the home we're living in can't suddenly be priced out of our reach on a whim.
Is there another alternative lurking around? I mean, over there at Generation Rent, I mean, I'm sure over a swift beer or two, you must have sort of crunched the numbers and had a look at, even other alternatives. Is there another way of doing it? I've long thought that there must be more intelligent ways of building housing and certainly quicker ways of building housing. But nobody's thus far has actually listened to me on that. Are there any other theories of getting people into affordable housing?
I mean, the big other strand and the big cause, one of the major causes of the high rents we see now is the loss of social homes and the huge mass selling off through policies like Right to Buy and councils being unable for whatever reason to build new social homes. So a major tenet of that is what the government is doing to an extent is creating more genuinely affordable homes that will take pressure off the rental market. But even with all the will in the world, that will take time, and renters are really, really struggling now. As someone who's been renting in London for the past decade, I've seen more and more of my income swallowed up by my landlord. And it leads to a sense of hopelessness, a sense that the system is against you, and kind of a bleak outlook for the future. So it needs to be a combination of measures. Yeah. But I think limits to rent increases have to be central to that.
You could move, Nye, couldn't you? You could go live somewhere where it's cheaper.
I mean, I'm born and bred from North London. I've always lived in London. I don't think it's too much to ask for someone to be able to live in the community they grew up in, and rather than having to go elsewhere because I can't afford it.
There's lots of nice. Cleveland's quite nice, and the rents are about a quarter of London.
But this is my home. This is where my family is. This is where my friends are.
You'll make new friends, right?
A home is
a
foundation
against making
of your
new
life.
friends?
People should have the choice to put down the roots where they want to and where makes them happiest. And I'm happiest in London. I just wish my rent was a bit cheaper.
Yeah, no, I'm joshing here, of course, but I do wonder whether the overarching argument in this country will always be, look, we're not North Korea. We don't have people telling other people what they can charge or what they should pay. It's not how we roll. It's full of bear traps and pitfalls. So notionally, it sounds very kind, and Polanski-loving lefties will be cheering and popping the champagne, but everyone else will be going, no, this is state intervention. It's a step too far.
I mean, I think we have to consider that we're talking about homes here. We're not talking about choices. We're not talking about, what type of mayonnaise you buy in the supermarket, for example. We're talking about something that everybody needs, a foundation of our lives. And we're talking about putting a slight limit on how much can be charged after costs have soared in recent years. I don't think that that's akin to North Korea or something like that. It's just about making renters' lives slightly better and more secure.
Good work. Nye, great to have you with us. Thank you. Nye Jones, Head of Campaigns for Generation Rent. It's a double-edged sword. Everybody is aware of it. I do know from talking to God knows how many landlords, and yes, if you've got no mortgage on your house and you haven't had a mortgage for 25 years because you've owned it for that long, and maybe you own two and you're charging £2,000 a month rent, so between the two, you're making 48 grand a year and you don't even have to get out of bed. Look, no one's going to shed any tears if somebody says, sorry, mate, your 48 grand a year is going to go down to 40 grand a year because we've got some rent controls. I know that's quite a seductive sell, but I would argue that is not a very typical case of a landlord. And there are lots of landlords who are renting out homes that are just covering the cost of their mortgage. And when mortgages were going absolutely bananas, just to bring bananas back into it, those landlords were taking a hit, and some were working at a loss to rent out their homes. And it is skew if. The cost of a house to buy is just gone, I was about to say bananas again. We can't get away from the flipping bananas. It really has. I was talking to somebody last night about, you know that argument, or the anecdotes rather, that everybody tells about, oh, you know, when I bought my first house it cost this, if only I'd hung on to it and rented it out, today it would be worth this amount of money. You can play that game all day long, and on a bad day it will drive you quite literally mad. You can't do that, but there are clearly questions about the cost of, you know, when they talk about, well, there's a crisis, there's a housing crisis, the cost of a house, it's gone down by, the average house has gone down by £2,000, and you think, yeah, but it's gone up by 102,000 in the last 6 years. I mean, really? Everybody's done all right out of it, mostly.